to it for the blending?
They did it.
They did?
Yeah.
Jnana-timirandasya vidyanam shalakaya chakshuram militam jena tasmai shri gurave namaha. Panchakalpatarvyascha vipasindhuvaiva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Namo Mahavanandaya Krishna Prema Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gaurasamaya Shri Gaurachandaya Radhe Pratadaya Krishnaya Krishna Bhaktaya Bhaktaya Yam Pavitam Yamanakritam Kritam Swapayano Vyakatratarahatya Chaiti Janmaya Tayo Taravo Vinidis Tam Sarvabhutamidayam Vaidasmi Najivami Twayana Iti Vigyayarani Tam Nainam Chidanti Bhaktyavahina Apayadakshe Shittas Chitalam Yamade Kripamanita Saranam Tapanam Vinde Namaste Charanam. So first of all, I offer my humble Dandavat pranams unto the lotus feet of my spiritual masters. Nitya Lila Pravishtam Vishnu Parasatan Satashishiman Shilvaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. And Nitya Lila Pravishtam Vishnu Parasatan Satashishiman Shilvaktivedanta Narayana. Dandavat pranams to all our Guru Varga and Dandavat pranams to all the assembled devotees here and online. So today is the auspicious appearance day of Srila Bhaktivedanta Vamana Maharaj and the disappearance day of our beloved Srila Bhaktivedanta Rai Maharaj. Srila Gurudev is so kind to us that this day is mixed with his godbrother's appearance day, so it is not solely a disappearance day festival, but rather appearance day and disappearance day. So Srila Maharaj, he would often hide on his Vyas Puja day, on his birthday. He'd go hide. They didn't want to be glorified. So this is his Vyas Puja day and his 100th Vyas Puja day, right? His the 100th centennial celebration of his birth. And Srila Gurudev didn't like to see us sad, so so the two combined together make a very beautiful day to celebrate the glories of these amazing personalities. Generally, my tendency is just to tell stories, and with Srila Gurudev and the little association I had with Srila Maharaj, I have a lot of stories. But generally, the stories are about, oh, I was here and I was there, and it turns into just glorifying myself. I got to be here and I got to be there. So that's embarrassing. And I know Srila Gurudev liked us to glorify Vaishnavas in a formal way, especially emphasizing their teachings. So I thought I would try to be a little bit formal, which is not my nature, and then I can just tell stories. In 2010, when Srila Gurudev departed, I jotted down as many remembrances as I could, thinking that I would lose them, they would go away. But through the years, that's not happening, because truly, Vaishnavas, they never leave us, especially here in New Bhaktivinoda Ashram. Srila Gurudev's presence is so felt that it's very difficult to feel separation here. Srila Gurudev liked us not to be too much involved in creating the festival so much that we didn't have time to remember our spiritual master and his loving instructions and affection towards us on these days, and so much involved in festivals in the organization that we didn't have time to maybe shed 1 or 2 tears. So, so Guru would have us say some little history of the Vaishnava's life. And of course we know, I know much more history of Srila Gurudeva, just a little bit about Srila Bhamaraj. We know that Srila Bhamaraj was born, I actually don't know where he was born. You know where he was born?
100 years back.
Where?
Where?
Okay, but he was brought to the temple to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur very early on. I think 6 years old he was there, and he wanted to stay. And even though his parents didn't want him to, he wanted to stay, and he got to stay at a very young age. Srila Bhamaraj was Shrutidhar, he had perfect memory, and he was put under the care of Srila Bhaktivedanta Keshav Maharaj, who would have him learn shlokas, and he could learn up to 16 shlokas a day, and for every shloka he would get, Gurudeva would say he'd get a chocolate, and then that word chocolate means candy, some kind of candy. We were always thinking chocolate's okay, chocolate. As Westerners, we were always anxious to the glories of chocolate, but this is some candy, and so many candies a day he would give them to his friends because there were so many. And we know that Srila Bhamaraj at a very early age, I think he was 12 when Bhaktivedanta Keshav Maharaj and many of the devotees in the Math were put into prison on false charges, and this young boy, Bhamaraj was okay. He was Sajan Sevak at that time. That was his name. He was serving the Vaishnavas in the prison. So in an Indian prison, it's not as if they have like regular meals or water. Your family members or friends have to bring you sustenance to stay alive. And so he had to arrange for all this. He didn't have initiation yet. So from the jail, through the jail bars, Srila Bhaktivedanta Keshav Maharaj gave him the Diksha mantras so that he could go back to the temple and do the cooking and Thakurji Seva. And even he had to go to the lawyers and discuss how they would be released from prison. So he was an amazing personality. His nature was very grave and quiet. I personally got to receive his darshan towards the end of his pastimes here, and it was pretty amazing. He was deep in samadhi, and he was sitting on like a chair and on a platform like it looked like an altar, and there were visiting hours and the curtains opened, and his servants had arranged that there were darshan hours. He was sitting chanting only, and we could circumambulate his altar. Premi, you were there? Yeah, and we could circumambulate we were with his disciples, Bhamaraj and Kumadiri. And at that time, Srila Bhamaraj was so deep absorbed in samadhi that he didn't even recognize his own disciples, Kumadiri and Bhamaraj. But they didn't mind. I was watching them. They didn't mind at all because they were just seeing how beautiful he was in this state. So we circumambulated, we paid our obeisances as if we were Thakurji, and and that was pretty astonishing and pretty amazing to see. So a little history of Srila Gurudeva. He was born on February 7th in 1921 around 4 a.m. on Moni Amavasya. So it was often told that Srila Gurudeva, mostly he was a thief, and thieves are born on Amavasya day when the moon is dark. So Gurudeva also was a thief, and he was a stealer of hearts. He would travel around the world and he would steal hearts. So he was born in a Brahmin village called Tiwaripur, and in the district of Buxar in Bihar, near the Ganga. His brother told us a few stories about him as a young person. He was the eldest son. He had an older brother, but his older brother had died, so he was the head son, which in India means he was pretty much head of the family after his father. Like responsible for the family members. Even later, he would be financially responsible for his whole family. His father's name was Balishvaranath, and his mother, Sri Lakshmi Devi. One time he told me a story about his mother. He said that one day, my mother got bit by a snake, a cobra, and she died. And I was like, what? Your mother died when you were young? Yeah, yes, when I was young. And then he said, but we put her on a cart. They had horse carts, and we took her to my uncle's house. Gurudeva was saying, and my uncle had special mantra that could bring one back to life and cure snake bite. So it took 12 hours to get there by horse cart. And so his mother had been dead for 12 hours. And then he said, and then his uncle recited the mantra and she came back to life. So, I mean, it's amazing personalities that could.
He told you the story?
Yeah, he told me the story. Told me a little bit about his mother. He called me Guru Ma, and some people think it was because I was the wife of the school teacher, and one time he said, "Oh, she's my mother too." So he told me a little bit about his mother. She had the ability to recite poetry on the spot, like a rapper, but beautiful poetry. And so she would, at gatherings, she would be given, the microphone, if they had them, I suppose, I don't know, to begin to recite poetry, glorifying, of course, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. What else did she? Once he said I won't say it. I'm not sure, but I believe once he told me that she had these eyes, these blue eyes. This is where I got these blue eyes from her. So they were in the Ramanuja Sampradaya, and he was named at birth Sriman Narayan. And his grandmother gave him the nickname Bolanath, which is a name for Lord Shiva, which means very calm and simple and peaceful. So that was his nature. Then we have heard some amazing stories of his childhood living in this village. And it was an early age. His family would be the center of Vaishnava congregation, and they would have kathaas and Bhagavad Gita, especially Ram Lila. And so he had walking to school with his friends. It was about a 5-mile walk, and they would tell each other stories of Ramayana. So it was.
How many miles?
Was it 5 miles? 5-mile walk, yeah. And that's a pretty long walk.
That's our house to Nadine's house.
Yeah, that's about 4 miles, so a little bit farther than that.
Takes more than an hour, unless you.
Yeah. His family they were all Brahmins in his village, but they were farmers. So he grew up on a very beautiful farm with horses, and he worked really hard carrying, large sacks of grain and became very strong. There are also stories of some mystical like abilities that he had as a child. One boy was locked in a closet for being naughty, and in his school, and he was calling his teacher, "Let me out! There's a snake in here! There's a snake in here!" And this big like python like snake got wrapped around his body. At the end of the day, the teacher let him out and was like shocked that this boy was like strangled by this snake and pretty much had left his body, and he was just blue from lack of oxygen. So our Srila led the children and the teachers in reciting parts of the Ramayana and praying that his soul would be given, liberation or freedom from birth and death. And then again, this boy came back to life, and so later on, in his brother told us that in their house they had one room that was just for a classroom, and Gurudeva, being the eldest son, would bring all the other children into this room, and they would have to do their homework, and he would instruct them and help them with their schoolwork. So I just think it's really interesting. Srila Gurudeva's personality is always dedicated to scripture and study and helping others. So let's see. When at a certain age in his village, a boy would receive his Brahman thread, and Gurudeva refused to take the thread unless his family guru could answer some of his questions. I thought that was really interesting because here we were born, some of us were born in the West with so many spiritual questions and nowhere to ask. And even Srila Gurudeva was born in this high Brahminical family. But in Kali Yuga, even his family guru, the son of the family guru could not answer his questions. So, but eventually a pure personality came and did answer his questions, and he took the Brahman thread. Excuse me if I don't know all the details to that story. So this is a day of remembrance, and in this remembrance, there is a kind of meeting, and so I'm hoping during the day so many devotees will speak and share their thoughts. Gurudeva would use the word remembrance in an interesting way. It wasn't like, "Oh, I remember when I was 5 years old and I did this and I did that," as if something that of our past that we're recalling. He would use the word remembrance as in the term smaran, like bringing into the forefront of our mind an idea or a pastime. So when he told the pastime of Bharat Maharaj in New Braj, he was using this word remembrance in such a way that I didn't understand, because I thought to remember something I actually had to have experienced it one time. But he was using the word in such a way that we can remember, like putting something in the forefront of our mind without actually having been there. So I asked him, Gurudeva, what is the significance of this word remembrance? And he said, "Oh, you cannot imagine." And I loved it when he answered questions like that, because it meant, oh, this is going to be good. This is something way beyond my imagination, my grasp. And he said, Bharat Maharaj remembered a deer at the time of death, and he became a deer. He said, "So when I leave, you remember me, and I will be there." So this was an amazing experience to to have such a personality in our lives, like face to face. So I have left the history section. Let's see, let me go back to history. As a teenager, Gurudeva was really athletic. He was, what was it, track, like, what's it when you have all the abilities of track, all terrain or all, anyway, he was state champion. And so the British at the time, of course, they ruled India, and they had a contest. They were going to have a race, a running race, and any boy who won the race would get to go to the police academy. So Gurudeva himself told us this story. So he went to the race, and he was known everywhere as the fastest runner in all of Bihar. And so it was kind of assumed that he would win the race. So it was a long field, like a football field, like an American football field, that long. They had to run to the end of one field and back. So Gurudeva told us that he started with his group running, and he went very, very slow. So that by the time the main group had gone all the way to the end of the field and were on their way back, he just turned around and sprinted, because he had all his energy still. He sprinted to the end of the finish line, and of course he won. And some of the boys were objecting, and he was saying, anybody who thinks that I haven't won the race, I will race you right now. And Gurudeva had full energy, because he had only sprinted a little way. He had full energy. The other boys were really, really tired. And so he won that place on the police academy, which was a big deal, and offered a large job for him to be a police officer and inspector. And he told us this story. Also, Maharaj told us this story. And he said, Gurudev said, well, these British officers, they're big, big cheaters, so why shouldn't I cheat also? And he won that post, and became quite high in the British police force. At that time, he was beginning to associate with, later on when he was a policeman, he traveled everywhere in the state, and he began to associate with Vaishnavas from Gaudiya that were connected with Srila Bhaktivedanta Keshav Maharaj Goswami. And he began associating with devotees, and was very much in it as a child. He had been very much schooled in Ram Lila. And he said even when as a child he had some glimpses of the Lila, Ram Lila. He said, but he always knew there was something more for him, that somebody else to worship, because he was Krishna Bhakta. So one day he was chanting, and he began chanting a lack of rounds, and there was one file that had gone missing in their police station. So I think Maharaj was telling us this story, and the file system in those days was just piles and piles and piles of files and folders. And the British had come in and asked for this file. It was mandatory. The personality, the officer who was going to come and get the file was considered very strict and cruel, and could fire somebody on the spot if he didn't like them. So they were really scared, the police officers, because they couldn't find this file. And so Gurudeva had just finished his rounds, and he said, well, let me just finish this round and out. And they're saying, what are you doing? Come and help us look for the file. And he goes, well, this is not my department, but okay, let me just finish my rounds. And then he went straight, after he finished his rounds, he went straight to one box of files and pulled out the file that was missing. And he told us that he thought, well, if I'm using the energy of the Lord. The Lord is giving me these opulences. Why should I use it for such a mundane thing as, a British criminal file? And so then he began to become disheartened with his job. This job was supporting his whole family, his parents, his uncles, all his family members, his brothers and sisters. And then around 1946, when India was just about to get freed from the British rule, they began to ask him to find those personalities that were rebelling against the British and to shut down these personalities. And so at that point, Gurudeva did not want to arrest his own country members for rebelling against the British. So he went back to his home, and he stayed home for a week and refused to work. So his British officer that was above him, Gurudeva came to hand in his resignation, and his British officer said, "Oh, why? You've done such a fine job." So even Gurudeva had stayed home for a week, but the criminals apparent criminals had been stopped and arrested, and all the credit was given to Gurudeva, and he was going to be promoted and given more money for salary. And Gurudeva was becoming more and more disheartened by this job in the police system. So at this time, he was corresponding with Srila Bhaktivinoda Keshav Maharaj, and it's said that Gurudeva would go to the train station. He was thinking about leaving home and going to Navadvip, where Srila Bhaktivinoda Keshav Maharaj was, to Devananda Gaudiya, and he was thinking, and he would go to the train station and he would sit and think about it for some hours, and then he would go home. And I can imagine leaving all of his family members without him, not only just financially, but emotionally also. They were dependent upon him. He thought, and then one day he was sitting by the train station, and he felt like he heard an inspiring voice that told him that you have to go, you have to leave now, you have to go now. So he pretty much packed a small bag and got on the train without telling anybody, and he went to the train station. Which train station would arrive in? Navadvip. It's called Navadvip train station. And he was dressed as a British police officer in a white suit and a big mustache. He had one small little suitcase. And in the meantime, at Devananda Gaudiya, Srila Bhaktivinoda Keshav Maharaj realized that Gurudeva was about to arrive. He was coming. And so he sent his Sevak, Sajjan Sevak, was our Srila Maharaj, and to the train station. There hadn't been correspondence. He just knew by heart that Gurudeva would be arriving. And Sajjan Sevak, he took one lantern and he was calling Tiwari, Tiwari, calling his name. And Srila Gurudeva, he had arrived at the train station and had gone, because he was a police officer, so he could go to the station there, to the station master, and say, "Can you tell me where Devananda Gaudiya is?" And so he was in the station room, and he heard someone calling his name, Tiwari, Tiwari, and he sees Srila Maharaj, and he said, "What? How did you know I was arriving? I didn't tell anybody." He said, "Oh, our Gurudev, he knows past, present, and future, and he knew you were coming." So then he took Gurudeva back to the mat, and he met Srila Bhaktivinoda Keshav Maharaj for the first time. And Gurudeva offered his Dandavat Pranamas, and they embraced, and both were crying and weeping. This obviously they had eternally been serving in other realms together, and this was their first meeting in this material world. So then we've heard so many beautiful stories about Srila Gurudeva and Sajjad Sevak and Radhanath Prabhu. This was our Srila Gurudev, Srila Vanraj, and Srila Tirobhava. They became like brothers, and even Sajjad Sevak, he was the senior most in Bhakti. He actually had his Harinam initiation from Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. But he's very quiet and reserved. Whereas Radhanath, Tirobhava, and Gurudev, they were really bouncy and lively, and they would often have big discussions, sometimes arguments. One time in Navadvip, just one time, I got to see all three of them together on the platform, and we were at the yoga pit where Mahaprabhu was born, by the neem tree, and there was a big kirtan hall. There had been devotees were like dancing wildly, and then the three of them were sitting on the platform, and they were going to speak. And so it was Srila Vamraj sitting to his left, and Srila Tirobhava, and sitting to his left was Srila Gurudev. There were mostly Westerners, hundreds and hundreds, maybe 300 or 400 Westerners in the audience. And they were discussing, you could tell, even from a distance, you could tell they were discussing who was going to speak. And they were kind of passing the mic back and forth. And they offered it first to Srila Vamraj, and he was like, no, you speak, these are mostly your followers, to Gurudeva. And Srila Tirobhava is like, no. And so they went back and forth, and Gurudeva he's the youngest amongst the three. So it was really interesting for us to see, because we never saw Srila Gurudeva in any kind of inferior position. He was always like topmost. So we were watching, it was so delightful. And Gurudeva even looked kind of small and young, and being honoring his godbrothers, and then so they had made a decision. Srila Vamraj was just very grave and had his eyes closed. Srila Tirobhava was sitting very peacefully by Gurudeva, and Gurudeva saw that he was to speak, even though he was the youngest, and he began Gyan, and Srila Tirobhava grabbed the mic, and he started, and he started his Mangalacharya, and Gurudeva was like, he was already set in one direction, and he was like flustered. And Srila Vamraj, he started laughing and Srila Tirobhava was laughing and and Gurudeva was like, and then he also started laughing. So to see this delightful behavior amongst the three of them was amazing. They had such different personalities, and yet they were so close. Gurudeva would say they're one heart and three bodies. Srila Tirobhava, when Srila Tirobhava departed, it was it 1 or 2 years later Srila Vamraj left? 3 years? 2 years later, Srila Vamraj left on the same day. And my god sister, Vrindavan Vilasini, she went to Gurudeva and said, Gurudeva, they left on the same day. And Gurudeva said, yes, and I will also leave on this day. And everybody was like really worried and scared. And years later, in 2010, when he was beginning his the departure pastimes, everyone was watching for that day, because he had decided to leave on that day. And how glorious that is, that these personalities are so close that they would depart on the same day. But Gurudeva didn't go, because devotees there were crying and praying, and praying all around the world also that wouldn't leave. If he had left on that day at Govardhan, it would have been mass hysteria. It just would have been really wild. So instead, he said, I'll see you in Navadvip. And he went to Puri, and he quietly left on this day, on the appearance day of his godbrother, Srila Bhakti Maharaj. Okay, so so that's a little bit of history, and then Gurudeva would be pleased if we spend a little time remembering his Gurudev, Srila Bhakti Keshav Maharaj. Srila Bhakti Keshav Maharaj was one of the first disciples of Srila Bhaktisanta Saraswati Thakur. He joined him when he was very young, and he did amazing things in his lifetime. Whenever anything really difficult came up, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati would go. Whereas Vinod Brahmachari, because he would make things happen. One time he moved a whole graveyard that had been a pastime place of Lord Chaitanya, and it had become a Muslim graveyard. So in the middle of the night, one night, with a little crew of devotees, he took out all the graves, threw them in the Ganga, and planted trees, old trees. So they must have planned this for a long time, because they had potted trees, and then they planted them, and they were old trees. And when there was a court case, and the judge said, "Well, this was a graveyard. Why did what happened?" And the devotee said, "Well, it's a park. These are old trees." And then the judge said, "Yes, they couldn't have grown just overnight." He did amazing things. And one time, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's Gurudev, Srila Bhakti Babaji Maharaj, his samadhi was falling into the Ganga, and it was raining very hard, and devotees didn't know what to do, and Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur said, go get Vinod Brahmachari, and so they did, and in the rain, he took 3 boats, those big, long, Navadvip boats, he tied them up together, and he rowed them this way, rowed it to where the samadhi was falling into the Ganga, and just as the samadhi was falling into the river, it landed in these 3 boats. And he was able to bring the samadhi back to the shore where Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was. When Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur saw his Gurudev samadhi being brought across the Ganga, he paid his obeisances in one spot, and that place is where they put the samadhi. Have you been there? Yeah, it corresponds with Radhakund. And
it's in Mayapur, but they made Radhakund and Shamakund.
and it's where the famous jack tree is that Srila Bhakti Keshav Maharaj was sitting under when Bhakti Rakshak Srila Maharaj came and saw, who is this brahmachari that everyone's paying obeisances to?
The other Radhakund is
yeah,
the other side of
there's 2 Radhakunds. Yes. So he was an amazing personality, and the sannyas guru of our Bhaktivinoda Srila Prabhupada, Bhaktivinoda Swami Prabhupada, and definitely such a significant role in spreading Krishna consciousness all over India and all over the world. Srila Gurudeva once told us that when Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati came here, he came with his associates, he came with his parkars. So they were it was very easy for them, and they very quickly distributed Krishna consciousness throughout India and all throughout the world. Okay, so I wonder how much time I have. Let's see.
20 more minutes.
Okay. So now I get to come to the parts that we have told some history for quite his spiritual master. We can spend a little time glorifying Srila Gurudev's disciples, who are most amazing and are accomplishing so much preaching projects now, and And we can come to, perhaps I can tell just a little personal pastimes of when Srila Gurudev came to the West in 1996. He came to our little town of Badger at the end of May in 1996, and one of our godbrothers, Gurudeva, he had a meeting with the men. There were many families there at that time, maybe about 250 devotees lived in Badger, and more than half were children. So we had a very large community. Gurudeva spoke to the men, and some were worried because in ISKCON there were whispers of, he is preaching differently than Ashram. Some whispers and rumors, but we were a bit removed from ISKCON proper. And Gopa said, don't worry, he'll come, he'll spend a few days, and we will get to have his association, honor of Vaishnava, and then he'll leave and everything will be the same. The thing is, it didn't happen that way. Srila Gurudeva came, he was going to spend, I think, a couple of days with us. He ended extending his trip another day, and he just completely captured and captivated most of the residents of Badger. For me personally, he began instructing me right away. He came to our temple and I was doing the arti, and I got to and Gurudeva was standing right. I hadn't even met him yet, and he was standing right at the curtain line, like where the deities were. I was doing arti, and I got to the chamra, and I was like pushing the chamra around, like really, forcefully and in a fancy way that we learned in ISKCON. And I turned around because we would offer to the devotees after offering to the deities, and he's standing looking at me, and he shook his head. Like, you are doing this completely wrong. And then I thought, oops. Okay, and when I did get to meet him for the first time, face to face, it was his last day. And I stayed up all night thinking, what do I ask a person who is of the same caliber as my spiritual master? What would I ask? If I could just ask one question would I ask? So I stayed up all night, and then I had a 10 o'clock appointment to meet with Srila Gurudeva. But Madhav Maharaj was in charge of everything, and who got to go in Gurudev's room, who didn't get to go in room. So I was sitting there. Madhav Maharaj didn't know me, and he was walking back and forth, bringing Gurudev so many things, and bringing him his lunch, and Gurudev took rest, and it was hours and hours and hours before Madhav Maharaj let me in. Only after I had as sincerely as I could, prayed to a picture of Srimati Radhika that happened to be in the living room I was sitting in. I was praying and praying. Finally, I was allowed entrance. And the first thing Gurudev said to me was, where have you been? And I was like, whoa. I had been cooking for the devotees. My god sister and I, Sikundi, we decided that we would get some bhakti points if we cooked for all the devotees that had come with Gurudev. So Madhumar said she's been cooking, and Gurudev said, oh no, I wanted you to hear, and immediately he was taking possession of my heart and showing me the discrepancies, the holes in my education, the misconceptions I had developed in the 20 years of absence from Srila Prabhupada, and immediately beginning to take that role of helping me on my spiritual path. He said, I wanted you to hear. You don't need Sukriti, you need Bhakti. So just saying these few words, you don't need Sukriti, you need Bhakti, I understood that I had actually performed the last 20 years of any kind of seva I had done was completely wrong. because I have done it like in a Christian style. Well, if I do this, I won't suffer, and I'll get to go to a better place when I die. Pretty much that was my mentality, and I realized this is not proper proper behavior to approach Krishna. And then at that first meeting, as he did with many other devotees, he kind of, it was almost like he was like a computer, and it's just sort of like printed out who you are, what you need, what books to read. And it was like he was like mumbling under his breath, like this calculation. He later he told us he could actually read a person's past lives and past, present, and future just in their foreheads. So I watched him, and he was like mumbling, okay, you read this, you read that, you read this. And he did this with many devotees, and began teaching us. For Srila Prabhupada's disciples, we had developed many misconceptions. Without Srila Gurudev's intervention, we definitely would most likely have lost the path of bhakti, because Srila Prabhupada had left in 1977, and one thing he said was, I've done 50% of my preaching, now I will concentrate on Varnashram Dharma. So in our ignorance, we thought, oh, so Varnashram Dharma must be the next step for us, must be the most important thing. So we started taking care of cows, and in Badger, we were trying to develop strong marriages and raise nice children, because we had heard some statistics that the Christians actually had less divorces than devotees did. So this was a competition, and we were going to get our marriages strong. So definitely we were going farther away from bhakti. So without Srila Gurudev's intervention, I think it would have been a bit disastrous. He began to help us, especially Srila Prabhupada's disciples, with our misconception. One was that there was always a pure devotee on the planet. We didn't know this. We thought Srila Prabhupada had left, it was all over for us, we missed out, and that was it. Gurudeva assured us that there was always a pure devotee on the planet. He explained to us that we must know our sadhya, we must know our goal, or what would our sadhana do. So he began to introduce the idea of Radhadasyam, which was almost like giving us permission to think on those levels, because we would never allow ourselves to think in any terms of having any kind of position in that spiritual realm. He told us later that if you're following me, you're most likely in this Madhurya Ras, in this Radhadasya mood. It's not always the case, but most likely. He told us we must always be under guidance in all of our activities, and that Varnashram is not the goal of life. Varnashram is useful in the sense that if we're accustomed to greeting devotees and offering them a seed and a glass of water and some prasadam, then if a pure devotee wanders into our home, our house, and we offer them a seed, a glass of water, and some sweet words, then that would be the perfection of Varnashram. He taught us that it was not allowed to become hopeless. This was an emphasis, he made this emphasis over and over and over and over again until our minds were, whenever our mind would come to that place of hopelessness, or it was too hard, I can't do it, and useless, then we remember Gurudev saying, and do not become hopeless. It was not allowed. It's just not allowed. There's always hope. And in his association, we learned that. He also explained to us that first bhakti comes and then our anarchas go away. So in our previous education, we had thought that we have to work on our anartas. Oh, I eat too much, I sleep too much, and I have these bad habits. But Gurudeva said, rules and regulations are fine, but first bhakti will come. Then these anartas will go. This was a really big misconception, and it's was quite like pounded into us that we have to work on our anartas. But Gurudeva showed us that no, work on your bhakti, especially sadhusanga, because that's where bhakti comes from. Then these anartas will go away. He also explained to us many, many, many times that our Srila Prabhupada was in Madhurya Ras, that he was himself a gopi. And one time we were in New Jersey with Srila Gurudeva in 1996, and two scholars came to see him, Ms. Satyaraj and another Sanskrit scholar who I can't remember his name. It's just horrible. Anyone remember his name? Prabhupada's Sanskrit scholar. Now he works for. Yes, Virginia Prabhu. And they came to see Srila Gurudeva in suits and ties. We were a small group, maybe 12 of us were with Srila Gurudeva, and we were casually staying in someone's house, and they came to see Gurudev dressed in very formal attire. They were nice devotees, and I was a little bit laughing because I never saw Satyaraj in a suit and tie before. And so Gurudev was laughing in a little laughing mood, and he said, "Oh, your Swamiji, my Guru Maharaj, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, they appeared in this world to be like big, strong men." He said, "But actually, they were little girls." He said, "They have cheated you." And Gurudev was laughing, not laughing, but so smiling, and he said, "But I will not cheat you." And this was their first meeting with Satyaraj and Pradyumna, and they were a little bit nervous and scared. And I'm not quite sure if he was joking. So my point is that Srila Gurudev made the point again and again that Prabhupada was in this mood of serving Srimati Radhika, and he told us again and again, so many times. Once in Badger, he was telling us the color sari. Okay, this was really rare. He didn't usually tell us such high katha, but in the class, he was explaining about Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur as being Nayana Mani Manjari, who is the eyes of Srimati Radhika, and Radhika wanted to see what was going on in the world, so she sent her. And then he began to tell us the color of Rupa Manjari sari, and he said it was very dark red. I remember this really distinctly because I was thinking, what is dark red? Like, is it dark deep red? Is it maroon? And for, quite some time I was thinking about what is dark red, and he was still talking. And then he said, and your Srila Prabhupada, he also wears this same color, sorry. And he is serving in the kunjas. Yeah. So this was important to us for us to even enter into the idea of aspiring for Radhadasyam. We needed to be assured that this was the proper behavior of a disciple following our Guru. So these are some of the misconceptions that Gurudev helped Srila Prabhupada's disciples with. He had made a promise to Srila Prabhupada as Prabhupada was departing that he would help his disciples. Prabhupada said, "I brought so many monkeys, and can you help them?" Knowing that we would need help in the future. Srila Prabhupada told us that when I leave, you can take shelter of two personalities, Srila Bhaktirakshat Srila Shamaraj for philosophical questions, and for questions of etiquette, you go to Srila Bhaktivedanta Narayan Maharaj. I remember thinking, what etiquette? What is the significance of etiquette? Thinking that is how to hold a teacup. But etiquette was a word I had thought a different meaning for. But then later, meeting Srila Gurudeva and seeing his behavior and especially his relationships with so many Vaishnavas and how carefully he honored all personalities, all people, and especially Vaishnavas according to their elevation in bhakti. And this idea of etiquette really is about Vaishnava behavior, and it is so important in our devotional life. So I definitely could go on and on and on forever, but you might be getting tired of hearing me speak.
I have to do the offering, so keep going.
When I was trying to, the experience of being with Gurudeva was pretty incredible. I did get to meet Srila Prabhupada. I didn't get to talk to him, but I got to be in his close proximity and hear some of his classes. But meeting Srila Prabhupada, I knew that, this is the most powerful person that is on this planet right now, and the most powerful person I have ever met. And meeting Srila Bhakti Rakshak Srila, I got to speak to him for a few minutes, and I realized speaking to him that, this is the kindest person on the planet and the kindest person that I will ever meet. Then meeting Krishna Das Babaji Maharaj, that when I met him and got to speak to him for a few minutes, I realized this is the most joyful person, most blissful person that is on the planet and that I will ever meet. Meeting Srila Gurudeva, I was trying to find a word for his quality. He had this quality to break down the barriers and build a vast relationship. And I can't find the word in English. Perhaps it is this Bhaktivinoda, that he could make a fast, loving bond immediately. Is there a word in English for that? Yeah.
It almost sounds like magnanimous, but
But this connection,
yeah,
immediate connection, loving connection. Kind of like when you're a child and you meet someone sort of your own size and you say, "Oh, you want to play?" And there's no, you're immediately fast friends. There's no, it doesn't take years and years to develop a relationship. It's just there. So he had this ability to, and we knew that he could see everything within our heart, and yet he still loved us and cared about us, and we had a place in his sangha, even no matter how lowly we were or disqualified. Srila Gurudeva would often give 3 examples for the ultimate examples of Guru Seva. When he was explaining to us the significance of Guru Bhakti, he explained that it's the backbone of Bhakti. This is one of his main teachings. And he would tell 3 stories to illustrate this. He would tell the story of Aruni, who was a disciple of Domya. This is in the very beginning of Mahabharata. And Aruni, he was a very dedicated disciple, and it was raining very hard, and his Gurudeva's fields and gardens were being demolished by the rain. So he had to lay his own body down as sort of like a dam to stop the rain from destroying the garden. He spent the whole night that way. And when his guru came in the morning and said, Aruni, where are you? What are you doing? And he said, I'm here, Maharaj. He was practically dead from the elements. And Domi was so pleased with him that he gave him all spiritual realization. So this was an example of Guru Seva, to give one's own life. Another example Gurudev would give of Guru Seva is Upamanyu. Upamanyu was taking care of his Gurudev's herd of cows, and he would and his Gurudev asked him, how are you maintaining yourself? How are you eating? He said, oh, I go out and I collect alms. And Domi said, no, any alms you collect you give to me, to your guru. You shouldn't accept any. So Domi took all the alms and Upamanyu had nothing to eat. So, but Upamanyu was still remaining healthy. And Domi asked him, now what are you eating? He said, oh, I'm drinking the milk from the cows. Domi said, no, you have not offered that to your guru, to me. So don't do like that. So then Upamanyu was still healthy, and Domya asked, now what are you eating? He said, well, when the calves drink milk from their mothers, I am taking the froth from their mouths. Domi said, no, don't do like that. The calves are very merciful, and they will save this milk for you instead of drinking it themselves. So then he had nothing at all to eat. So he went into the forest and he took the sap of some milkweed, poisonous plant, and he became blind, and he fell into a well, and his guru, Damya, couldn't find him. So he said, where are you? And Upamanyu was like, I'm here, I'm deep in this well. And he explained to Damya what had happened. And Domi said, oh, call mantra for Ashwini Kumars and they will come and they will cure you. So he did that, and Domi was so pleased with his disciple that he also blessed him with all tattva and siddhanta. And Gurudeva would give these examples. These are from Mahabharata. And then he would give the example of the exemplary disciple when Param Gurudev, Bhaktivedanta Keshav Maharaj, exchanged cloth with Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur when the Samartha Brahmins had arranged to kill Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur and stop the parikrama in Navadvip. And so Param Gurudev, he took Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur into a house of a favorable devotee, and he changed clothes with him. Gurudev explained he had to forcibly change clothes. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur didn't want to change clothes with him because he knew that Param Gurudev was giving his life. Because they were going to kill him, and the police had been bribed, and it was just for certain that they were going to kill Param Gurudev. So he managed to convince Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur to exchange clothes with him. They snuck Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, who's now in White Club, snuck him out and put him on a train. And Param Gurudev was there waiting for this mob to kill him. At the very last moment, the police did step in, and so Param Gurudev was saved. So Srila Gurudeva would give these three examples for disciples who have dedicated their life to their spiritual master. And then Srila Tirobhava Maharaj, he told us one more example. He said that there was one disciple of Param Gurudev named Ananda Mohan Brahmachari, and he was very young and very sweet, and he was a good cook and singer. He was very, very dear to Srila Bhaktivedanta Keshav Maharaj, and he had developed tuberculosis at a young age. So Param Gurudev himself was taking care of him so that he wouldn't expose anybody else in the month. It's a very contagious disease. At the time, there was no cure. And so Gurudev said, please let me do this seva of taking care of Ananda Mohan Brahmachari. And Param Gurudev said, no, he's my son. I have to take care of him. And Gurudev said, am I also not your son? So Param Gurudev allowed him to take care of Ananda Mohan Brahmachari. He was taken to different convalescent centers, different hospitals. Eventually, he did leave his body. Gurudev was with him. He was taking care of him. He was feeding him. He took rest underneath the bed where he was in the hospital and was there when he departed. He departed in a very beautiful way with a picture of Param Gurudev on his heart and saying, oh Baba, and they've come for me. And Gurudev said, well, take me too. But he did leave his body. So at that time, Srila Tirobhava Maharaj told us that Srila Gurudev also contracted tuberculosis. So luckily and fortunately, he was healed from it, but he also is an example of giving his life for his spiritual master. The point was that Srila Gurudeva made such an emphasis on Guru Seva as the backbone of Bhakti. We learned right away that serving Guru, we say Sakshat Hari Vena Samasta Shastra. So Guru is the embodiment of the Lord here in a seva form. And just as we approach Krishna, he will reciprocate according to our approaching him. So we learned right away that Gurudeva was also in this capacity. As we approached him, he would reciprocate. So one year in Varshana, he raised up 3 fingers and he said, I only have a few disciples who are actually doing what I want and not what they want. He said a few, but he held up 3 fingers. And I remember looking at those 3 fingers going, I want to be one of those 3 fingers of doing what he wants and not just what I want. So this was also another lesson that Gurudeva gave us. It's not about what we want to do. I want to do this for Gurudeva, I want to do that for Gurudeva. What is it that he wants us to do? So somewhere in the 90s, early 90s and late 80s, some of our ISKCON leaders, Tamal Krishna Maharaj and others, were going to Srila Gurudev in Vrindavan and asking him, in Mathura, and asking him questions. And we heard this rumor that Tamal Krishna had become soft. And if you knew him previously, he was very strong leader, very rough, very strict. And so we heard this rumor that Srila Gurudev that Tamal Krishna Maharaj was becoming soft. So in the association of Srila Gurudev, these ISKCON leaders began to experience Vaishnava association in its reality and was changing their hearts. Unfortunately, these leaders were not allowed to continue to meet with Srila Gurudeva. It was just one personality, Shamarani Didi, who actually left the whole ISKCON hierarchy of leadership and came to Srila Gurudeva and received so many blessings. They were just about to make her a guru, and this was in the early 90s, and she refused and went to Srila Gurudeva. One thing that was significant for me when Srila Gurudeva first came to Badger was that he immediately was speaking about hearts and flowers and tears. So I never heard Vaishnava speak like this, and Srila Prabhupada's movement is very like military encampment. We were book distributors, and everything was done according to with strict military discipline. So Gurudeva was talking about stealing hearts like flowers and offering them to Srimati Radhika, and offering and that our tears were of valuable in spiritual currency. When I did meet Srila Gurudeva for the first time, and I was asking my question, the burning question of my heart that I had stayed up all night trying to figure out, what would I ask him, Srila Prabhupada? And I asked him, how can I repay all that my spiritual master had given me? And I was crying just because of the emotional experience of Maharaj not letting me in this room and staying up all night trying to figure out what to ask Gurudeva. So I was crying, and Gurudeva said, 2 tears. And I'm like, what? I was shocked that this was the value of these tears, the sincere tears of our heart. This is how we can begin to repay our spiritual master, although we can never repay him. So he would tease me, where are my tears? Where are my 2 tears? He said, when we were leaving New York, I was with him in 1996 in this first New York tour, the culmination of his first world tour was to end up in 26 Second Avenue, where Srila Prabhupada had started his first temple. Srila Gurudeva had sent Prabhupada his books there, and these small Radha Krishna deities that are on the altar at Brooklyn, those are the deities that Gurudeva sent. I know this because in probably in 1978, I was worshiping those deities, and I asked the pujari, where are these deities from, the small ones? They were all scratched. And he said, oh, they're very old deities. They were sent by a friend of Srila Prabhupada, Srila Bhaktivinoda Narayan when he was at 26 Second Avenue. So they're still being worshipped at Brooklyn. These were the deities that Gurudeva sent. So we knew that many of Prabhupada's godbrothers were not so helpful. In some ways, maybe not. Prabhupada was asking for help, and they were unable to give help. But we did know that there was this personality. Actually, there were many who did help Srila Prabhupada, but we knew of this person who sent the books and the deities, and this was our Srila Bhaktivinoda Narayan. Gurudeva. One Vaishnava I heard speaking on the glories of Srila Gurudeva when he was saying that he could control a crowd of thousands with his eyes. So this is an amazing quality of Srila Gurudeva. He could do amazing things just with his glances. So one time my god sister Vrindavan Vilasini, she had some silver crowns made for the deities in Vrindavan, and she was bringing them for Gurudeva to approve of for the deities in Mathura. And Gurudeva said, I'm not so much interested in this. These are nice, but I'm not so much interested in this. I'm more interested in the messages from the eyes of Thakurji. So, what amazing personality. Just speaking to him was amazing because you knew that he knew everything about you. He knew your heart completely. He even knew, if he asked you a question, he even knew the answer that you were already formulating in your mind. So it was an amazing experience to get to associate with such a personality. So I'm just about to end. You've been very tolerant. Thank you for listening to me. There was one reporter in Australia who asked Srila Gurudeva, what is your mission statement? And Srila Gurudeva said, my mission is the same mission as Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Swami Prabhupada, because in Australia most people know about Srila Prabhupada. My mission is the same as theirs, to distribute love and affection. He said, and the highest expression of love and affection in this world is the giving and receiving of Hari Katha. So the most exciting thing in Srila Gurudeva's association was to actually be sitting in his assembly just as he was about to speak, and his eyes would begin roaming over the audience, and he would place everybody with his eyes in their proper place. If you're sitting in the wrong place, like I was a Prabhupada disciple but could never sit in front of Shamarani, that would be really bad. So his eyes would tell me, over there. And we had our spot. So we also had our place in his heart. He had room for all of us. And especially toward the latter years, maybe the last 6 or 7 years of Gurudeva's preaching in the West, we didn't get to see him or speak to him so much anymore, but everything he would give in classes. So I only asked him personally 4 or 5 questions because he would answer all of my questions in his Hari Katha. He was very kind to ladies. Because in our previous institution, that ladies were not considered so valuable, or we had a place. But Srila Gurudeva immediately began to glorify the ladies and telling her husbands, "Oh, you should follow her. You should be like her." And he said, hardly anybody of the men remember this, but he said, if you're in a married relationship and your wife is more advanced than you, you should follow her. If the husband is more advanced, then she should follow you. But none of the men remember that. It's okay. So the last day with Srila Gurudeva at the LA temple, I spoke the other day that he said, now all your questions will be answered in Srimad Bhagavatam. So read Bhagavatam and study Bhagavatam, worship Bhagavatam, distribute Bhagavatam, and become Bhagavat. And he stood up and he walked out the door with full energy. And then I saw him the next day, saying goodbye at the airport. And I had always hankered to see Srila Prabhupada's smile, because it was, he's famous all over the world for this oceanic smile. I had seen pictures, but in person, I didn't get to see that smile. So I had this desire in my heart. When Srila Gurudeva was just leaving the airport, he was not well. There were a few devotees there. He was very quiet. And then it was time for him to depart. And Madhav Maharaj and Brajanath, they went ahead of Gurudev. And you know how in the airport there's those aisles that you go down, and Gurudev was in a wheelchair, and an attendant was pushing him. And I was anticipating he would walk by me beyond one of those barriers. And so I was just all alone, and I was there. Gurudev had the attendant stop, and he looked at me, and then he broke into this oceanic smile. And it was the first time that I had seen Srila Gurudeva without, he wasn't chastising me, he wasn't correcting me, it was just like, you know, it was like a goodbye, but also showing me that kind of like he had done the best he could with me, that we had done what we were meant to do in this lifetime, that we wouldn't see each other again, and that he had come on behalf of Srila Prabhupada, so that some of us could have Guru face to face. And he displayed that amazing oceanic smile. So on this day, I am praying to Srila Gurudeva, Srila Maharaj, that in some way or some shape or some form, I can do some save and somehow or other please my spiritual masters. Thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you all for joining. Hare Krishna.